Perfect.
For anybody that I haven't met yet, I'm Rob Worthing, and I was with an outfit called Tenkara Guides LLC out of Salt Lake City, and we were the first Tenkara specific guide service. Started in 2010, and have been kind of going since. Unfortunately, we all left Utah, so we're closing up shop this year, regrettably, but we started off kind of figuring out things ourselves. There were 3 of us in the business, and back then in the US there weren't a whole lot of people fishing Tenkara yet, and so a lot of people were having to figure out things on their own. There weren't videos or books in English or really much information available, but my partners in the business, Eric and John, and I had the advantage of having 3 brains that could work together, whereas a lot of other people were fishing by themselves. And I think that helped us out a lot. When we fish together on the water, we fish together on the water, like side by side. And we play golf. So first guy's up, other 2 guys are there to heckle. And if he catches the fish, next guy's up. If he gets hung up in the trees, he gets heckled and the next guy's up. And you just keep on, jumping each other like that. Similar to the game of golf. And you learn a whole lot watching other people fishing together like that. I'd really encourage you to do it. But after doing that, we saw the Tenkara community grow, and that's kind of what prompted us to start the business. And had a good run. We ended up getting hooked up, fished with a lot of Japanese anglers, both in the US and in Japan. Most of the modern day masters we fished with. And there was one guy that we met, Masami Sakakibara, that was just clearly beyond everybody else. You can see me doing all these loopy things in the air, and Eric and John and I had started messing around with aerial mending like this in our fishing, and really thought we were onto something, but also weren't entirely sure we weren't full of shit because nobody else was doing it. We hadn't heard of anybody else doing it. And then we found Masami, and Masami was doing all the same stuff, only he had 40 years of practice on us, and it was absolutely brilliant what he could do. I mean, showing up on the most highly pressured match the hatch western mountain streams and fishing these bugs that nobody would believe, these flies, kabari, nobody would believe, and slaying it. I mean, catching fish in our dirty water, catching fish behind Western anglers, catching fish behind guides. It was just unbelievable. So he became our teacher. We adopted him. And for about 10 years, each year we would fly Masami to the United States, and we would host what's called Oni School. And Masami's name, in Japan, a lot of anglers get a fly fishing name. And Masami's name was Tenkara no Oni, the Tenkara demon. So we had demon schools in Utah on the Provo River. For about 10 years he'd come out. We run two courses a year, 3 days on the water, super intense. Everybody was totally spent at the end. And we all learned a ton. I've now written a book recently. Got copies in the truck if anybody wants one. That's my shameless plug for the day. And it basically documents Masami Tenkara no Oni's fishing style and sort of the story of the Oni school for the first time in English. So I'm going to go over some of that with you. I'm going to start with basic casting, and then we'll go into more advanced stuff, some of the aerial mending stuff, and what we call Oni loops, demon loops. So for the day, everybody gets to be what Masami likes to call little demons. You're all little demons in training, I guess. The first thing you need to know about basic casting is the grip. And there are arguably 3 or 4 ways you can hold a rod. One that you see a lot is finger on top, pointer finger on top at, you know, if we've got a clock here at 12 o'clock. And that's not a bad way to do it, especially in the beginning or when using really light gear. The reason why is because that finger kind of acts as a backstop on your back cast, and a lot of people are overcast. So it's nice from that standpoint. You're also utilizing a lot of the little tiny delicate muscles of your fingers, dexterous muscles of your fingers to execute the cast. And that can be helpful as well because you know, when you get into more advanced stuff, you need those little delicate dexterous muscles to do the work of these oni loops. The problem with it is that it can be very, very tiring, and a lot of people will actually develop, I've seen a lot of tenosynovitis, let's just say itis, you know, in that extensor finger, you know, muscle. And that sucks. It's never fun to fish in pain. The last problem with it is that it actually limits your ability when you do get into advanced casting to rotate a little bit because of the position of your wrist. So the finger on top's okay, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Another one is thumb on top, which for those of you with, you know, Western background might be the way you were taught. And that's really great in the sense that, that was impressive. That's really great in the sense that, you know, you're using bigger muscles, the bigger muscles of your, that stabilize your wrist and activate your thumb to do most of the casting. That means less fatigue. And for anybody that has, you know, maybe an impairment, post-stroke, spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, things like that, that, you know, these guys that we used to take on adaptive trips, you know, that can be a really effective way of holding the rod. So, you know, go for it if you need it. But again, the problem here is that you're limiting your ability to rotate a little bit because of the position of the wrist there. And you lose the dexterity of those tiny muscles of your fingers. So you lose a little bit of control when you start getting into advanced stuff. The last one I'll cover is kind of a in-between of the two. We call it an opposing grip. And that's where your pointer finger is maybe at about 10 o'clock, or sorry, 2 o'clock, and your thumb is at about 1 o'clock. And that is sort of the compromised best of both worlds grip. So I would very much, you know, encourage you to hold your rod in a opposing grip. Yeah, that's good. So that's the grip. That's the grip we're going to use. Now when we use this grip, we want to use a very, very light grip. If you're over gripping the rod, you are not only going to be less accurate with your casts and fatigue faster over the course of the day, but you're also going to impair your ability for fly control, strike detection, hook set, everything. So practice a nice soft grip when you're using that opposing grip, or any grip you're using. The after the grip, there's the stance, and there's kind of two stances that you can take in fly fishing. I'm right-handed, so the rod's in my right hand. One is what we call an open stance, and that's where you're facing your rod. Okay, the foot opposite my rod is forward, and this is kind of like how I would throw a baseball, right? Or in my case, a lacrosse ball. So with the open stance, you know, this can be very good, and you'll see me use it at times, but it's not the way I would recommend starting. And the reason why is because you are already going to be worrying about wrist motion, elbow motion, shoulder motion. And when you're in an open stance, all of a sudden to all of that confusion, add torsion or torso rotation. So people get messed up really quickly doing that. So I would not recommend an open stance when you're practicing your casting. What I would recommend is called a closed stance. A closed stance is where if my rod is in my right hand, my right foot is forward, okay? This is more like throwing darts in a bar as opposed to, throwing a baseball, right? So we want to throw darts in a bar. And that stance needs to be athletic, knees bent a little bit, center of gravity weighted ideally a little bit over the forefoot, for your practice, okay? So that's the idea of the stance. So we've got the grip, the opposing grip, and we've got that closed stance here. And that closed stance allows me to concentrate on what's going on here, wrist, elbow, and shoulder, and negate, you know, torsion of the torso, rotation of the torso. So we got grip, we got stance. Now for the actual cast. The casting motion, basically, is a abrupt, but not strong, not powerful, just abrupt stop at 12 o'clock, thereabouts, clock here, coming down to about 45 degrees if you're taller, maybe 35 degrees if you're the size of Oni. He's 5'2". So, and that's it. And again, this motion is not powerful. You don't need power. The rod will do that for you. It just needs to be crisp with definite stops at 12 o'clock and whatever.
Your wrist stays stiff.
Yeah, so that's the next thing I'll talk about. Thank you very much.
I'm asking, I'm sorry.
I have your $20 in the car, by the way.
I'm asking.
So, you know, you will see a lot of Tenkara anglers talking about casting with the wrist, okay? The problem with casting with the wrist is you end up with open loops. You can't help it. Open loops are bad because, you know, they have a larger profile. They don't cut through, you know, wind as easily. They're less accurate, and you end up getting wind knots, you know, pretty frequently. Snapping off a fly, you'll get that with an open loop. I don't know if I can even do it. You hear that little crack back there? No crack. Swish, swoosh, no crack. Okay? So, you know, you don't really want a ton of wrist. The reason why that the wrist gives you all that is because if you look at like the top of my rod as I do this, I'll do all wrist. As I move this through the air, you can see the top of my rod traces an arc. Can you see that? The tip of the rod traces a clear arc if I use all wrist. Arcs are bad. Arcs give you open loops because you see the line follows the rod tip and the rod tip follows my hand. And what I need to do is trace a flat line. So my line travels in nice closed loops. My rod tip travels in a nice, you know, traces a nice straight line through the air, which means my hand has to trace a straight line. And if I'm using all wrist, I can't trace a straight line. What I need to do is figure out some way of taking this curve in my hand and filling out that missing pie slice up here between a curve and a straight line, right? Tangent for anybody that's really into, anyway. So I need that tangent line, okay? I could use elbow, and that helps some. So I negate all the wrist. You know, I will keep the rod completely against my form. So I negate all wrist and I use a little bit of elbow. And when sorry, I'm getting the line straight. When I do that, I get a less of a, definitely less of a curve. But there's still a little bit of curve there, okay? The final and real answer to this is actually some shoulder. So I'm gonna flex my shoulder up, bringing my elbow up, and then I'm going to chop it back down. The motion ends up being a little bit more like hammering in a nail or chopping wood, okay? As a matter of fact, Masami was a machinist in automotive plants. That was his career. He would work on the robotics in automotive plants. And he would practice the swing of his rod with the swing of his hammer. They were the same thing. Every night when he got off of the production line, he would cross the street to a bank that had a lighted parking lot and practice his casting. And yeah, the swing of his hammer and the swing of his cast are about the same. So that's what we want to do. Now when you put it all together, closed stance, nice soft grip with that opposing position. You don't want to rock your body back and forth. You stay nice and planted in that athletic stance. It's a crisp motion up to 12. For me, at 6'2", a crisp motion down to about 45 degrees. And I should end up with a cast that has a pretty good, you know, closed loop. Can't see my line, unfortunately, so I can't make it super.
I don't see your shoulder moving.
Yeah. So you can tell how much wrist, you're using with how far the butt comes off the rod. And you can see my rod is not coming, the butt of my rod is not coming too far off my forearm, right? There's just a little bit. There's a little bit of elbow, but not much. You can also see that my shoulder is flexing. My my elbow lifts off of the side of my body just a little bit. This is what I get for practicing open loops. Now I got a curly cue in there. So that's the idea. You see that just little bit of elbow lift there?
Can you face the other way?
Yeah, like this way?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if you can't see my line. So the butt comes off just a little bit, not much. And the elbow bends just a little bit, not much. And that elbow lifts off the side of my body just a little bit, not too much. Everybody see that? Appreciate it? Yep. Notice also, I'm not using, I'm hardly using any power, right? There's no real power in this. It takes nothing. I'm letting the rod do the work.
Did you say last night that only does like 10 to 35 for height?
No, well, so for a line this length, up to 1.5 times the rod, maybe 2 times the rod, he would use 90 to 35. That's about what he does. I have to keep it tighter because my arm is bigger than him, right? Oh, geez. You're killing me, Smalls. So that's the general idea, all right? If I overpower it, then I'm not going to get a good cast. You're gonna, when you overpower the rod bends so much, you reintroduce an open curve to the cast, okay? You don't need the power, and even in the wind, let the rod do the work. The last thing I'll talk about with this, if it doesn't seem complicated enough already, is the timing. Who here has a background in rod and reel fishing, Western fishing? Decent number of people. So when you're fishing with a rod and reel and a plastic line, PVC back in the day, airflow non-PVC lines if you're rich, you backcast, pause, wait for that line to almost straighten out, and then bring that line forward. Again in a straight line with closed loops, but there's this big pause at the end. You can't pause when you're fishing with these rods. The lightweight level line that we're using has inadequate mass to participate in the cast the same way that a plastic, fly line does, okay? It just can't do it. The rod has to do all the work. And what you do if you pause on the background, your back cast, this crisp stop of the back cast, loads potential energy into the rod, right? It bends backwards. And if you wait on the back cast, the rod is basically going to wiggle all that energy that you just loaded into it out into the universe, and it's not available to you for you to use it. It's just going to wiggle like that, right? So you can't pause. What you need to do is learn to use your rod to its maximum potential by starting your forward cast the second you feel the rod in maximum load on the back cast. So as soon as it's in maximum bend on the back cast, you bring your rod forward. Doesn't matter don't worry about what the line's doing. Worry about that part. So what I would encourage you to do during this practice session, if you'll notice, I've been casting with that finger, that pointer finger, on the blank. Seated just above the winding check, just above your handle. And that will allow you to start to learn to feel that blank load. And eventually you'll get to a point where you can pick up any rod and immediately adjust because you've learned to feel the bend of the rod. All right? So opposing grip, nice and soft, closed stance, nice and athletic, nice crisp stop, You know, snap it to attention at 12, no pause, just feel, you know, briefest pause as that rod loads, and as soon as you feel that rod maximally load, bring the cast forward. Not too much wrist. Don't let that line come off, you know, your, or don't let that butt come off your forearm very much, right? And that's it. Does that make sense? A little bit? Yeah.
So you said, I'm trying to understand, what does a good cast look like? Not like
Yeah.
form.
Yeah.
At the end of the
At the end of the line?
at the end of the line, you said this open and closed loop, but I didn't
Yeah.
understand what you're saying.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So while I'm casting, you mind holding this for a second? Can you see my line okay?
Yeah.
Not really. I might use the bigger line, but the line's coming down here. An open loop would be like that. All right. A closed tight loop would be like that.
On the back cast. This is your back cast. As long as it goes down.
And that then, if it's coming back basically 100 feet toward the round, it's then closed. And if it's just kind of slightly up and open, slightly 90, yeah, that was good.
For anybody that needs to see that, come on out here and I'll show it to you. Or if you want to practice on your own real quick, we can. But
Why is it open loop bad?
That's another question.
yeah, come on over here and stand behind me.
What's the key tip to avoiding the crash?
Not having an open loop. And I'll go around with everybody here in a second. We can diagnose some problems. So come right next to me. And this is something you can do at home too. You know, if you ever watch a golfer, any golfers in the audience? If you ever watch a golfer, you know, they look at the hole and then they look at their ball and they hit the ball. They don't look at the hole and hit the ball. Well, you can do the same thing with this, and you'd be amazed at the difference it makes with your accuracy. Look up at your loops. Okay. Look up at your loops and see how close, see how tight you can get that loop. Okay. Instead of looking down at whatever you're targeting, you know, line up your target. Maybe, you know, cast at it once. Look up and see if you can close that loop, and it'll be really accurate. So an open loop, if you look at the sky here, I want you to watch the way the line opens on the forward cast. See that big open?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that's an open loop, right? Open. And then a closed loop would be more like that. Like straight forward, straight back. Try to. Yeah. See how it's like flat? And that's the same amount of power.
Yeah. No R. Okay. No R. Cool. And then why do we? There's a question over there. He said, why do we want? Like, what does a closed loop actually get us?
Okay. So I guess there was a question, what does a closed loop get you over an open loop? And I kind of touched on that earlier, but I'll expand. So a open loop presents this big, you know, kind of surface area, you know, chunk to whatever you're casting through, the wind, right? The air. And that is bad. It's not going to pierce, you know, any breeze. It's not going to pierce the air. And overall, it represents an inefficient transfer of energy from the rod to the line. So you're losing power. And you'll see a lot of people with, you know, who cast with open loops, you know, eventually having to try to overpower, you know, to get it out there. Or they will do the dreaded push, which is a really common mistake in your error in your casting form. And that's where you can't seem to get that line, no matter how hard you whip it. You can't seem to get the line to like straighten out completely. So you end up trying to reach for it and get the line out that way. And that also is an inefficient transfer of energy. It just makes the loop bigger, honestly. So a closed loop gives you an efficient energy transfer from the rod to the line. You can use very, very little power to get a nice, accurate, you know, cast. and it pierces the air very well. Your accuracy increases, your distance increases, you avoid fatigue because the rod's doing all the work. It's just better. Huh?
You don't tangle the line?
No, I've got a little, I've done it a couple times here, demonstrating, which is unusual for me, honestly. I do have a little curly cue in the end of my tippet from casting with open loops, doing the demo. And as a result of that, that little curly cue is hanging up every once in a while. You will see, this is a little more advanced, but as your loops get, smaller and smaller, you will start to see me do a little bit of a, it's very subtle, but it's a little tiny check on the end of each forward cast. And that little tiny check with a super tight closed loop can help you rotate that rod tip out of the way of the path of the line. So it's not a loop that's stacked exactly over itself. It's a closed loop that's, on its side just a little bit. There's just this little subtle check. I really don't need it with this length of line, but a little subtle check at the end. And it takes very little power. Nice soft grip, very little power. And you hear swish swoosh, no crack, right? The reason you get the crack with the open loops is because as that open loop, as that line gets pulled through the open loop, it suddenly runs out of room, accelerates really fast to make it around that big curve, and the end of it ends up, acting like a whip. So you get the crack. The other problem with that is that we call that a tailing loop. And the other problem with that is that as it whips around and makes that crack, it can rebound and end up tangling, crossing the line. That's where you get wind knots from. So if you're fishing for the day and you go to change a fly or whatever, and you feel, a whole bunch of knots in your line, or you see, which I have now from doing that, so come check it out. So from demonstrating those open loops, I have 1, 2, 3 knots in my tippet. All right, and I literally formed those knots from doing open loops and demonstrating that crack. And every time I did it, the line crossed over itself and came into a little knot. The other thing you see is they got a horrible curly cue on there. You see that? That's also bad. That's why I use this line for practice and not for fishing. So yeah, you want a closed loop. Any other questions right now? You guys want to practice a little bit?
All right.
I'll try to come around to everybody and help you out. And then after that, for anybody that's interested, I can do some more advanced casting stuff. We'll talk about the loops. We can run through an easy way of learning that and start to talk a little bit about why we would use those and how they absolutely blow up your fishing. It just absurd difference in success.
But when you want to just throw it, like your first base, like sharply, I've been
Put a little figure 8 stopper. Alright. Okay. I'm not going to be able to do this one.
and see how it's more. Now when I mean parallel like this, right? Yeah, like, no, not, so I don't mean like this to the ground, but I mean like, see, so like it's at a line, you know what I'm saying? But it's not this.
This is a hitching post right
Yeah.
here. I'm just going to do it.
Again, I'm only doing this to go over.
You guys got a pretty light line on there. Should probably put.
Well,
I would do maybe just show them and you're kind of wanting to do it.
Now you cast by that creek. Look,
I can't tell really how far.
Doing more of this.
I had the hardest time with that.
Stop more abruptly at a 12.
And well, you're kind of open, so your rod tips.
That's how you just cast it. But this is all more of a tighter, like you said, let the rod do the work motion. I don't know why. I always put my left foot out, which is what he said not to do, but I always do it. I don't know why. Because I guess this feels weird for me, but then it keeps the motion. He's not wrong though, it keeps you just focused.
I'm a little tighter and I can.
About every other one.
And it's less
It's like golf, I gotta figure out what I did right.
better.
They might be
Pinpoint
dandelions right now.
Your what hurts, Tom?
What doesn't hurt at my age? You know what I'm saying?
He's 21.
Exactly. No, this is wonderful because I need to practice into the wind because it seems like
There's always wind for me. The
always
driftless.
wind. In the best spots where there's fish, it seems to be upwind of me. So.
The air, an open loop. So he's getting cracked because it's an open loop. I hear that. I say, oh, all right, there's an open loop. Now, where's it coming from? Keep casting. Do you see how far the butt of the rod's coming off of his forearm? So he's using way too much wrist. Do you see how little the rest of his arm is moving? Keep going. Can you appreciate that? He's using way too much wrist.
That was a big crack.
Yeah. So that's the first thing I want to tighten up. The second thing is that he's at least as tall as me, maybe an inch taller. So, his arm, if he goes from 12 to, 35, is going to be tracing way too long a line. And he's going to get some open loops from that. It's traveling too much distance for the line that he's using. So he's going to have to tighten it up. Yeah. It's the size of the arc. So you need to match the size of the arc, the length of the line that you're tracing in the air with how long your line is. I'm going to recommend to everybody, when you're practicing, don't practice with a line shorter than 1.5 times your rod length.
Oh, wow.
Just trust me on it, man. Just trust me. If you need to fish a shorter line, fine. If you practice with a line that's 1.5 times the rod length, casting a shorter line is going to be butter. It'll be so easy when you get on the water. Having said that, you'll probably learn to cast a line that's a little longer than your rod and end up fishing with that all the time anyway. Because distance is our friend, stealth is our friend. So keep going. So here's a corrective measure. For anybody that's played sports, you always start with the fundamental drills, right? That's how you start every practice, how you warm up for every game. So I'm going to give you a fundamental drill to bleed wrist out of your cast, okay? So what I want you to do, there's two ways to do this. What I want you to do is take that butt and slide it inside your sleeve. So if you got a long sleeve shirt on, just slide it in your sleeve. If you've got a rubber band at home, use that. That's going to limit your ability to take it off.
Oh wow, I can already feel that. Wow.
Yeah, now you see how he's not getting the same.
Oh, I got you.
Make me a liar. But he wasn't getting the same crack there for a second.
I'm still getting.
It's at least quieter. So that's how to bleed wrist out. If you don't have a sleeve shirt on, or if you start to get used to that, the other way to do it is just think to yourself like you can kind of snake the butt of the rod against the side of your forearm and push down a little bit against it so that it just locks against your wrist or locks against your forearm and it doesn't come off at all. If you practice that for 2 minutes, a minute, whatever, at the beginning of each one of your casting sessions, you'll have less wrist for the rest of your casting. Another fundamental drill that's going to bleed power out of your cast and get you to soften up your grip. So I noticed he had a little bit too much power, but the other thing I noticed is if you come over and look at his knuckles, they're blanched white because he's gripping that hard, okay? Yeah. So what he's gonna do, and this sounds crazy, and it's gonna be hard with a little bit of breeze we've got, but just go with me here. After you do that first fundamental drill of locking that butt against your forearm completely and casting for a minute, you're going to move on to the second fundamental drill, which is casting with 2 or 3 fingers. So you're not going to hold the rod at all. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use 3 fingers. I'm going to lightly grip the top of my grip, my rod handle, with my thumb and my middle finger. All right, I'm going to hold my elbow close to my body, and I'm basically going to kind of do the motion. This finger up here is just going to be a stop. So it's going to rotate up here and stop, and then rotate down here and hit the butt of my hand. Rotate up here and stop, rotate and hit the butt of my hand. So I'm really only using these 2 fingers. Put a 3rd finger on there, the middle finger if you want. But I'm literally just going to cast like that. And you can see I can still get, full line length, relatively tight loop.
And he makes it look simple.
Everybody see that?
It's gonna take me half an hour.
So that's the second drill. So you do the wrist bleed out drill, then you do the soft grip, no power drill, minute each, and then you go on to your casting practice. When you put all those things together, it'll be a lot better off. The vast majority of us don't have enough time on the water, all right? So lawn casting, you know, make this your lawn game at home and practice at home in your lawn. You know, you can use a plate for accuracy, you know, you can use your kid, you know, whatever you, I don't know.
5-gallon bucket.
Yeah, 5-gallon bucket, like whatever you want. You know, move down to a shot glass, be all cool about it. You know, make a YouTube video. When you're practicing in your lawn, short sessions more often is way better than a 2-hour binge on the weekend. If you can just take 5 to 10 minutes a day or 5 to 10 minutes 3 times a week, that's going to translate enormously, you know, once you get back on the water. And I keep on saying this, but I encourage everybody to use a longer line than you know, would normally fish with. You know, practice with at least 1.5 times the rod length. One of the reasons for that is because a longer line is going to amplify any little funkiness in your cast, and it will start to teach you good fundamentals. Once you get back on the water and maybe you want to shorten that line up a little bit, it's just going to be so easy. You know, it's going to be thoughtless, automatic. But I'm going to move on to some more advanced stuff. So anybody that wants to stick around for that, whether to see it or you know, to participate, let me know. Immediate contact with it, and my line is going to start dragging that fly, right? That'll get me a great surface presentation with no cross current drag. I've eliminated cross current drag. But if I'm trying to sink my fly, it's going to fight against that. And I don't care if you're using a Kabari or a bead head, same principles. If I try to do that same thing and I do a down current loop to land my fly up current, and I'm waiting for that fly to sink, it never will, at least not to its full potential, because that line is dragging it back up to the surface the whole time because it's caught in that fast, it has to penetrate that fastest, you know, surface layer. Follow me? So what I can do is reverse it. It's the same thing as a tuck cast in competition nymphing or, you know, any other fly fishing. So if I do an up current loop and land my fly downstream, up current loop, land my fly downstream, then my fly has a chance to sink as my line that's inevitably caught in that faster stuff overcomes it. In other words, my fly can sink because it has, if I'm going from A to B, my fly landed down current can sink and has a shorter distance to travel in the same time as the line penetrating the fastest stuff has to travel at a faster speed, right? So that gets my fly a chance to sink and anchor itself in the you know, depths before my line catches up and I maintain contact. So with any other technique, there's a million techniques to sink a fly, but if I want to sink my fly, water's going this way, same current, you know, maybe I do a shallow presentation by landing the fly upstream of the line. Now I want to do a deep presentation, I'm going to reverse it, and I'm going to land my fly downstream of the line. Let that fly sink a minute and get itself caught in the depths as my line overtakes it. I will add that upstream oni loop to land my fly downstream with any other way you have of sinking a fly. You know, casting a fly into a little eddy and bringing that fly into the tongue. You know, that gives it more time to sink before it gets caught in that tongue. If I add this to it, it'll get even deeper. So I can use 2 techniques at once. Casting above a plunge and letting that fly tumble over the plunge and letting the, you know, the hydraulic sink from the plunge push it down to the bottom. I add this, it'll come over that plunge already, you know, 6 inches deep. So this adds, you know, depth to anything you want. So now, not only can I find new casting lanes in tight, you know, tight places, open up new holes to my fishing, wrap casts around boulders, eliminate cross current drag, but I can also choose to use an unweighted kabari on the surface or deep. More or less it will. Now this has all been upstream stuff, so let's do just a brief thing on downstream stuff. Remember those giant painted strokes that we did? The big giant oni loops? Well, say this current's still coming down here. And I have fished all this and I'm happy because I caught 78 fish in that one hole, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is, you know, say I caught all these fish over here, but I'm pretty darn sure there's still a fish holding here in front of this boulder. In that nice pillow, right? He's riding that bow wake, you know, that surface wave. He's gonna be dangerous with the backstop, okay? So this may not be the best. But if my fish is right there, I can do a downstream presentation by using that big painted brush stroke and landing my fly directly in front of that fish, a couple feet in front of that fish, right? Big painted brush stroke. And what that big painted brush stroke gives me is it not only gives me an accurate way of laying down the line parallel to the current, but it also ensures that I am in immediate contact with my fly when it hits the water. And it ensures my fly lands out straight on the end of my line. Because if it doesn't, if you try to cast and there's a little tiny curve at the end of your line where the fly lands and the tippet goes, then that fly is going to whip around violently in the current and probably turn the fish off. If instead I land with that big painted brush stroke, fly dead tight on the line, in a straight direction aligned with the current, the fly is just going to show up and sit there and look normal. Now once you do that, you know, you can hold it, literally hold it in front of the fish, and that the microcurrents there will animate the fly, right? Maybe if that doesn't work, you add a little bit of pulse. You're not pulling the fly upstream, you're not letting it slide downstream, you're just holding it in front of where you think that fish is. All right, little pulse. Maybe if that doesn't work initially, with my rod kind of up here, I decide to get a little more invasive and I want to do a downstream deeper presentation. So instead of casting with that big open painted loop and bringing my rod up here for a shallow presentation, I cast with the big painted loop and keep my rod almost touching the water. And just that little bit of difference in the direction of drag on the line will keep your fly, you know, anywhere from 6 inches to 2 feet deeper, just depending on the situation. So I've got a down current shallow, a down current deep, and then if I want a really deep down current, I'll lead my fly. I'll use that up current loop, land my fly downstream, allow that line to come all the way down here, and when it gets in the right, I'm allowing that line to travel underneath my rod, and when it gets to the right position, I'm going to drop my rod and hold it again, the entire time keeping direct contact. Make sense? That's a lot.
You talked about bonfire talk. You would talk about like a steeple cast and like a you call that like your last resort, but do you have like a quick minute to?
Yeah. We need a tree. I really don't use this very often.
What's the situation that you're using it just when you're absolutely out of options?
Yeah. So I'm going to stand underneath this tree, okay? And I'm going to use the Oni loop concept, and I'm actually going to palm up my rod like this. You remember that 2-finger drill? Comes in handy here. I'm going to tip that rod down like this, and my back cast is going to be straight up in the air. All right? So once my back cast goes straight up in the air, I then turn my hand and execute a forward cast as best I can. All right? Nope. And it's never perfect, but you can get the fly out there, you know, enough, right? There you go. I'm doing a little better now. So like I said, the idea here is I'm not giving you, you know, these 5 techniques, these, you know, 6 names for presentations. I'm giving you tools and knowledge that you can then take to the stream, reach into your toolbox, combine a bunch of stuff to figure out what needs to happen every day. Meet any kind of scenario you get. And I don't care if it's a rotochoke stream in, you know, the Smokies, or it's the Green River in Utah. You know, I mean, we fish the Green River in Utah from the shore with Tenkara rods and do very well. And it's huge for anybody that's been there. Yeah.
Sweet. Thanks, Rob.
That's an intro.
Thank you.